Happening right now, the Senate behind closed doors taking up an open-ended debate on the fate of the Dreamers. This is an unusual move, by the way, by the U.S. Senate because there's no actual bill on the floor right now, just the debate. The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he wants it all wrapped up by Thursday, and that's a much shorter timeline than Republicans had earlier indicated. McConnell saying anyone who comes up with a deal with 60 votes, quote, wins. Sources are telling CNN, by the way, that President Trump has also been making calls to some of his conservative allies in the Senate just ahead of this full-scale debate. Let's bring in Senator Bob Menendez. He's a Democrat from New Jersey. He's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's joining us from Capitol Hill. Senator, thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Wolf.
Before we get to the immigration discussion, I want to quickly get your thoughts on the breaking news, the scandal enveloping the White House right now over Rob Porter. The FBI apparently advised the White House last year about the accusations against Porter. Despite all of that, he was not only able to stay on the job and review classified information, he's actually, we have now been told, he was actually under consideration for a promotion at the White House to Deputy Chief of Staff. Does the president need to speak out about this and explain to the American public what's going on and to condemn publicly domestic violence?
I think he has a moral obligation to do so, and as the leader of our country needs to speak out strongly against domestic violence. At the State of the Union, my guest was a leader in our state in the work against domestic violence and sexual abuse. And it's pretty outrageous that we keep getting different stories about what really happened here in the White House. And today's statement by the FBI director that, in fact, they had the information and gave it to the White House speaks volumes about the president's lack of concern on this issue. So he needs to speak up. He's past the time he should have spoken up, and he needs to do it vigorously.
Yeah, despite the fact that the White House was presenting information about the failure to give him permanent security clearances back in March, later in November, then January, and now we're told just before the scandal erupted, he was about to be promoted potentially. It's pretty shocking. Anthony Scaramucci, who was for a few days the White House communications director, just tweeted this. Based on FBI testimony, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly almost certainly knew about credible allegations of domestic abuse against Rob Porter at least 6 months ago, then recently forced others to lie about that timeline. Inexcusable. Kelly must resign. Do you agree?
Well, look, if that is all the case, then I don't see how the Chief of Staff can actually continue to serve in the position in which he stonewalled the information, allegedly got others to lie, and at the end of the day, on such an incredibly important issue, both within the White House and its structure, as well as to the nation on domestic violence, I just don't know how you survive that.
With at least 30, maybe 40 White House staffers still operating without full security clearances, even though the investigations into their backgrounds have been going on now for a year plus, is it time to tighten the rules? Who can operate within an administration without those kinds of clearances?
I believe it is. I mean, there is a reason that people who have sensitive positions within the administration must go through a security clearance. It is to understand that those who will have access to the highest office in the land, those who will have access to information that is critical to both the national interest and the national security are people who pass the highest standards. And so the reality is that if we don't have individuals who have passed those standards, then you have to constrain who is able to have access to this information, so that you don't end up in such situations like you have in this one.
Let's get to the immigration debate in the Senate that's unfolding this week. The Republicans have introduced an amendment that closely resembles President Trump's immigration framework. Is there a unified plan for the Democrats right now?
Well, what Democrats have been doing is building upon the Gang of Six, of which I'm a member, proposition, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. We are working with Republicans, moderate Republicans particularly, who are looking for a pathway to find a opportunity for the Dreamers to realize their dream, which is really what this debate is supposed to be all about. The reason we got this commitment, the reason we are having a debate in the Congress is not about broad immigration policy. It's about the 800,000 Dreamers and how how we find a pathway for them and what is necessary in order to get 60 votes. So we are on a feverish search with our colleagues to find out what will be necessary to get to that important 60-vote threshold so that we can actually have something positive that moves forward from the Senate into the House that gives the Dreamers a pathway and whatever border security elements that we need in order to achieve that. But, you know, what we can't have is the ultra-nationalist, the right-wing, ethnocentric voices that are speaking into the president's ear dictate what happens in the Congress. Because if you want to do that and have a broad debate on immigration, I don't want to talk about the 800,000 anymore. I want to talk about 11 million. That's not what we're here for. And we have to remember that narrower gets it done. And that's the commitment we need to have to these young people.
Can you get it done by Thursday? Mitch McConnell says he wants it done by Thursday. Can you get 60 votes in favor of a compromise immigration bill passed in the Senate by Thursday?
Well, that's a new obstacle that I was unaware of until today. Never did we say that this was going to be a 2-day or 3-day debate on one of the most significant issues, contentious issues that we have before us. So it is our hope to try to achieve that, but I don't think a arbitrary deadline should ultimately snuff out the dreams of these young people. These are young people who 91% of them are employed, gainfully employed, paying taxes. Even the Cato Institute, a conservative think tank, talks about the economic consequence of these dreamers not having a pathway to the nation. And so I believe that young people who came to this country through no choice of their own, whose only flag that they pledge allegiance to is that of the United States, whose only national anthem they know how to sing is the Star-Spangled Banner, whose only country they know is America, needs to have the faith they put in the federal government when they gave all of their information and those of their parents to the federal government in trust that they would ultimately have a safety net in this country, that we need to keep our word to them as a government.
But the president says he's ready to give 1.8 million dreamers a pathway to citizenship eventually if the Democrats agree to fund border security, build the wall, end what he calls the chain migration, the lottery system. Are you willing to compromise with him on that in order to allow 1.8 million dreamers to stay in the United States legally and eventually have a pathway to citizenship?
Well, first of all, Wolf, the Gang of Six, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, largely responded to what the president wants. Now, I find it obscene, the phrase chain migration. It is incredibly cruel to those whose ancestors were brought to this country in chains in slavery. It is a dehumanizing element of what is, in essence, family reunification, which has been the core of American immigration principle for over a century. The belief that when we have families together, that ultimately they strengthen not only themselves and help each other, but they help build communities and help build our nation. And so we gave on some of those elements. We gave very significant amount of monies to the border wall. We gave on changing the nature of the diversity lottery, which is not, as the president says, that you put your hand arbitrarily and you pick out the worst of the worst. These people have to go through every background check and every criteria that anyone immigrating to the United States has to meet. So nonetheless, in order to find a pathway, but we cannot be talking about a dramatic change in immigration policy when we're talking even about 1.8 million, when you want to change the whole nature of even legal immigration to this country. That's a much broader debate. What we should be doing is narrowing the focus on how we get 800,000 or even 1.8 million, as the president has defined, and what limited efforts are necessary in order to achieve that. You want to have a broader immigration debate? I'm ready for that, but that's not about these young people.
Very quickly, a final question before I let you go, Senator, and put on your hat as the top Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee. The sanctions against Russia bill, it passed overwhelmingly in the Senate, I think 98-2, 419-3 in the House. That was back in August, but surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, the president who opposed it, he signed it into law because he knew he couldn't override a veto. The president has declined to impose any new penalties because of Russia's meddling in the U.S. presidential election. Doesn't even speak about it, although, as you heard today, all of his intelligence chiefs are firm. They agree the Russians did it and still trying to do it. What can you do to accomplish your goals as far as the resolution to impose new sanctions against Russia is concerned?
Well, we are pushing strong oversight. I started that in a classified briefing just yesterday. I don't understand how it is that 6 months after the law was passed with nearly unanimous votes in the Senate and the House of Representatives, not one sanction under CAATSA, the legislation we're talking about, has actually been levied. Even though, for example, Section 224 of the law mandates, shall impose sanctions on Russia if in fact they are caught undermining the cybersecurity of any individual or any democratic institution, globally as well as in the United States. We heard his own intelligence people, CIA director, national intelligence director, both appointed by him, say that Russia not only interfered in our election, is going to continue to do so. We know that through Europe they have done so, most particularly in France. It is obscene that the president won't levy one sanction under the law that was passed unanimously by both houses of Congress against Russia. It's like telling Russia, you were welcomed in 2016 to interfere in our elections, and we look forward to your intervention in 2018. That cannot stand, and we're going to pressure every way we can, either through the appropriation process, looking at nominations, and maybe holding some of that, and doing what is necessary to get these sanctions enforced, because it's about changing behavior, in this case Russia's behavior, and we need to do it before these 2018 elections take place.
Senator Menendez, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.